Behind Hollywood's most heroic collie lies a story stranger than fiction. Male dogs playing a female character, an unbreakable motorcycle chasing habit, a rubber stamp pawtograph, and a beloved star whose death devastated his trainer so deeply he never watched another Lassie film. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about. Lassie 1954. Fact 1. All 9 Lassies were male dogs. Here's one of the most surprising secrets in television history. Every single dog that played Lassie on the classic 1954 TV series was actually male, even though the character was supposed to be a female collie. Over the course of 19 years on television, 9 different dogs portrayed Lassie, and not one of them was a girl. This wasn't just a random casting choice or a lucky coincidence, but rather a deliberate decision made by the show's producers and dog trainers based on some very practical concerns about how female collies look on camera throughout the year. The reason behind this unusual casting choice comes down to biology and appearance. Female collies go into heat twice a year, and when they do, they shed a significant portion of their coat during those cycles. This means that for up to 4 months out of every 12 months, a female collie's fur would look thin, patchy, and much less impressive than usual. For a television show that needed its star to look consistently beautiful and heroic week after week, this was a major problem that simply couldn't be worked around with the filming schedules of the time. Male collies, on the other hand, maintain their thick, luxurious coats year-round without the dramatic seasonal changes that females experience. Beyond just the shedding issue, male collies are also naturally larger and more impressive looking than females of the breed, which gave Lassie that heroic, commanding presence on screen that made audiences believe this dog could really save the day. The size difference helped the child actors look smaller and younger next to their canine co-star for a longer period of time as they grew up during the show's long run. Fact 2. Pal was given away for $10. The dog who would become the world's most famous collie started his life as an unwanted problem pet that his owner literally gave away for free. Pal, the original Lassie, was brought to Hollywood animal trainer Rudd Weatherwax when he was just 8 months old because his frustrated owners couldn't handle his behavior anymore. The young collie had developed some serious bad habits that were making life miserable for the family who owned him, including barking constantly at all hours of the day and night, chewing up everything he could get his teeth on inside the house, and perhaps most problematically, chasing after motorcycles whenever he heard one driving down the street. Weatherwax agreed to take on the challenge of training this unruly dog, and the owner promised to pay $10 for the service and return in 1 week to pick up his newly trained pet. When the week was up and the owner came back to Weatherwax's training facility, he found that Pal had indeed become a much better behaved dog in most ways. Weatherwax had successfully stopped the excessive barking and the destructive chewing that had been plaguing the household, but there was still one problem he hadn't been able to solve. Pal absolutely refused to stop chasing motorcycles no matter what training methods were tried. The owner was so disappointed by this one remaining issue that he told Weatherwax he didn't want the dog back at all, and rather than paying the $10 training fee he owed, he simply gave Pal to the trainer as payment instead. What seemed like a failed training job and an unwanted trait at the time would turn out to be one of the luckiest breaks in Hollywood history, as Weatherwax now owned the dog who would soon become worth millions. Fact 3. The motorcycle habit was never broken. Even the best dog trainer in Hollywood couldn't break Pal of his obsession with chasing motorcycles, and this quirky habit stayed with the famous collie for his entire life. Rudd Weatherwax was known throughout the movie industry as one of the most skilled animal trainers of his generation, capable of teaching dogs incredibly complex behaviors and commands that most people would think impossible. But Pal's intense desire to chase after motorcycles whenever he heard the roar of an engine and saw those 2 wheels spinning was something that simply couldn't be trained out of him no matter what methods Weatherwax tried. Rather than seeing this as a failure or continuing to fight against Pal's natural instincts, Weatherwax decided to do what all great trainers do and turn a supposed weakness into a strength that could actually be useful. Weatherwax later explained that whenever they needed to film a scene where Lassie was supposed to try to escape from somewhere or run away with intense urgency and determination, he would simply bring a motorcycle to the set and position it just out of camera view. The moment Pal heard that distinctive motorcycle engine sound and caught a glimpse of the bike, his natural chasing instinct would kick in immediately, and he would take off running with exactly the kind of desperate, focused energy that the scene required. In his own words, Weatherwax said, "I never broke the original Lassie of chasing cars, but we used this habit in filming. When we had a scene where Lassie was supposed to try to make an escape, we brought a motorcycle to the set." What started as an unbreakable bad habit that led to Pal being given away became one of the secret tools that helped create some of the most memorable and convincing escape scenes in the entire Lassie series. Fact 4. Pal was rejected from 1,500 auditions. Before Pal became one of the most famous dogs in entertainment history, he was just one face in a crowd of approximately 1,500 collies who showed up hoping to land the starring role in the original Lassie film. When Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer held auditions for their upcoming movie Lassie Come Home in 1943, dog trainers from all over brought their finest collies to compete for what everyone knew would be a major role, but Pal didn't make the cut when the studio executives walked through the long line of hopeful dogs and their handlers. The reasons for Pal's rejection were brutally specific and came down to pure physical appearance rather than any lack of talent or training ability. The casting directors felt that Pal simply didn't look the part of a heroic leading dog because he was male when they wanted a female, his eyes were considered too large and prominent for his face, his head appeared too flat on top instead of having the rounded skull shape they were looking for, and perhaps most notably, he had a distinctive white blaze that ran straight down the center of his forehead, which the studio considered unattractive and not fitting for their vision of what Lassie should look like. Instead of getting the starring role, Pal was offered a much smaller job as a stunt dog and stand-in for the beautiful prize-winning female show collie that the studio had selected to play Lassie. This meant that Pal would only be used for the dangerous or difficult scenes that they didn't want to risk with their actual star, essentially making him a backup dog who would rarely be seen on camera. Nobody at that audition could have predicted that this rejected, supposedly unattractive male collie with the two big eyes would end up stealing the entire role. Fact 5. A one-take river scene changed everything. A single scene lasting just a few minutes completely changed Pal's destiny and turned him from a rejected backup dog into Hollywood's biggest canine star. During the filming of Lassie Come Home, the production team decided to take advantage of massive flooding in the San Joaquin River in central California to capture some dramatic footage for a crucial scene where Lassie had to swim across raging waters. The female show collie who had been cast as the star was still in training and absolutely refused to jump into the dangerous-looking floodwaters no matter how much her trainers encouraged her, which left the director in a difficult situation with expensive film equipment already set up and a perfect natural disaster going to waste. Rudd Weatherwax was standing nearby with Pal, and he offered to have his stunt dog perform the incredibly difficult sequence instead. The scene required 5 separate stages of complex behavior that would need to flow together seamlessly. Pal had to swim across the turbulent river, haul himself out of the water onto the muddy bank, lie down immediately, without shaking the water off his soaking wet coat the way dogs naturally want to do, attempt to crawl forward while lying on his side to show exhaustion, and finally lie completely motionless as if too tired to move another inch. Pal executed every single stage of this demanding sequence perfectly on the very first take, and when he dragged himself onto shore and collapsed in apparent exhaustion, director Fred Wilcox was so moved by the performance that he actually had tears streaming down his face. Wilcox famously said, "Pal jumped into that river, but it was Lassie who climbed out." The studio immediately fired the female show collie and gave Pal the starring role, then spent the time and money to reshoot 6 full weeks of footage they had already filmed. Fact 6. Lassie earned more than Elizabeth Taylor. In one of Hollywood's most surprising salary stories, a dog actually earned more money than one of the actresses who would go on to become the biggest movie star of her generation. When Lassie Come Home was filmed in 1943, Pal was reportedly paid more for his work than young Elizabeth Taylor, who was just 11 years old at the time and appearing in only her 4th film role. Taylor was playing the part of Priscilla, the daughter of a wealthy duke, but she was still an unknown child actress at that point in her career, while Pal had already proven himself to be an incredibly talented and reliable performer who could nail complex scenes on the first take. This pattern of dogs earning impressive salaries compared to their human co-stars was actually fairly common in old Hollywood, where animal actors who could consistently deliver what directors needed were considered extremely valuable assets to a production. Pal's earnings only grew more substantial as his career continued, and the Lassie franchise became more successful over the years. By the time the television series launched in 1954, Pal and his descendants, who took over the role, were commanding even more impressive paychecks for their work. During the height of the show's popularity, the dog playing Lassie earned up to $4,000 per week for the television production, which might not sound like a fortune by today's standards until you adjust it for inflation. When you account for how much the value of money has changed over the decades, that $4,000 weekly salary from the 1950s would be equivalent to approximately $51,000 per week in modern currency, making Lassie one of the highest-paid actors on television, regardless of species. Fact 7. Male dogs gave birth on screen. The producers and writers of Lassie clearly weren't going to let a little biological reality get in the way of good storytelling, because they wrote multiple episodes where Lassie became a mother and gave birth to puppies, despite the fact that every single dog playing the role was actually male. This created some truly unusual behind-the-scenes situations where male collies had to convincingly portray the experience of pregnancy, labor, and nursing newborn puppies for the cameras, all while audiences at home had no idea they were watching a performance that was biologically impossible for the actor involved. The show featured several different puppy storylines throughout its long run on television, with the writers returning to this plot device whenever they wanted to create heartwarming, family-friendly episodes centered around new life and maternal devotion. During just the years when the character Timmy Martin owned Lassie, which spanned from 1957 to 1964, there were at least 3 separate litter storylines where viewers watched Lassie go through the process of having puppies. These included episodes titled The Puppy Story and Puppy Sitters, where Lassie had her first litters, and later an episode called Lassie and the Eagle, where she gave birth again. The most elaborate puppy storyline came at the beginning of the 17th season with a 7-part sequence called The Saga of Lassie's Puppies, where the show devoted significant time to following what happened to each of the 3 puppies after they were born. The male collie playing Lassie somehow managed to appear completely natural and maternal throughout all of these episodes, convincing millions of viewers that they were watching a devoted mother-dog care for her babies when the reality was quite different from what appeared on screen. Fact 8. Pal played both mother and son. Pal's acting abilities were put to an extraordinary test in the 1945 sequel film Son of Lassie, where he had to play 2 completely different roles in the same movie without anyone in the audience catching on to what was happening. The film's plot centered around Lassie's offspring, which meant the story required both the original mother dog and her fully grown son to appear on screen, sometimes even in scenes together. Yet the studio only had 1 trained Lassie dog available to work with at the time. Rather than training a second collie to match Pal's abilities and appearance, the filmmakers decided to simply have Pal pull double duty and portray both the mother Lassie and her adult son throughout the entire production. This meant that in some scenes Pal would be playing the older, wiser mother character, and then in other scenes he would transform into the younger, more energetic son, with audiences supposedly being able to tell the difference between the 2 generations of dogs based purely on context clues and the way the scenes were shot and edited together. The remarkable thing about this casting choice is that apparently nobody noticed or cared that the exact same dog was playing both mother and child in what was supposed to be a story about 2 distinct individual animals with their own separate personalities and characteristics. Movie audiences in 1945 happily accepted that they were watching a mother and son relationship play out on screen, never questioning why these two supposedly different dogs looked absolutely identical in every possible way. The fact that this casting trick worked so well speaks to both Pal's incredible screen presence and the skill of the director and editors who managed to make one dog convincingly appear as two separate characters throughout an entire feature film. Fact 9. Lassie's siblings were secret stunt doubles. Just like human movie stars who use stunt doubles for dangerous scenes to protect themselves from injury, Lassie had a team of secret stand-ins who took on the risky work so the main star could stay safe and looking perfect. Rudd Weatherwax kept several of Lassie's siblings and relatives around specifically to serve as stunt doubles whenever a scene called for fighting with other animals, rolling around in dirt or mud, or any other kind of rough physical action that might damage the carefully maintained appearance of whichever dog was currently playing the lead role. The reason for using these family member stand-ins went beyond just protecting the star dog from potential injuries, though that was certainly an important consideration when scenes involved staged fights with wolves or other dangerous-looking encounters. The bigger concern was actually about preserving the immaculate condition of the lead dog's coat, which required hours of grooming and maintenance to keep it looking thick, fluffy, and camera-ready at all times. Any kind of roughhousing, tumbling, or fighting would immediately mess up that perfect grooming work, matting the fur, getting it dirty, or causing it to stick up in odd directions that would be noticeable on camera. By keeping the main Lassie pristine and only using the dog for scenes that required close-ups, dialogue reactions, or calm heroic moments, Weatherwax could ensure that audiences always saw a beautiful, well-groomed collie on screen. Meanwhile, the sibling doubles would handle all the messy work of the actual physical action sequences, getting dirty and roughed up so their famous relative didn't have to. Because all the dogs came from the same family line and looked nearly identical to each other, viewers watching at home had no idea that different dogs were being swapped in and out depending on what each scene required. Fact 10. A paw print stamp, autographed photos. When Lassie became a major star, with fans all over the country wanting autographed photos, Rudd Weatherwax came up with an ingenious solution to a problem that nobody had really faced before. How exactly does a dog autograph hundreds of thousands of publicity pictures for eager fans? The answer involved some creative thinking and a clever use of materials that turned out to be both practical and charming at the same time. Weatherwax started by carefully creating a plaster cast of Lassie's actual paw, capturing every detail of the pad and toe shapes to make sure it looked authentic and recognizable as a real dog's footprint. Once he had this plaster mold perfected, he worked with craftsmen to transform it into a rubber stamp that could be used with ink, essentially creating what became known as Lassie's official pawtograph stamp. This rubber stamp was then given to the publicity department at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, where studio personnel would use it day after day to stamp what appeared to be Lassie's genuine paw print signature onto promotional photographs. The beauty of this system was that it allowed the studio to produce massive quantities of autographed photos without ever needing to bring the actual dog in to step in ink and walk across pictures, which would have been messy, time-consuming, and probably quite frustrating for everyone involved. Instead, workers could sit at desks and efficiently stamp out hundreds or even thousands of pawtographed photos in a single day, each one looking like Lassie herself had personally placed her paw on that specific picture. Fans who received these autographed photos in the mail had no idea they were looking at a rubber stamp reproduction rather than an authentic paw print, and the illusion was convincing enough that these pawtographed pictures became cherished collectibles. Fact 11. Lassie had her own pet dog. In one of the most heartwarming behind-the-scenes details about the Lassie franchise, the famous collie stars weren't just actors playing a role, but were also pet owners themselves, who traveled everywhere with their own personal companion dogs. The trainers and handlers recognized that being a celebrity dog who spent long hours on promotional tours, making appearances at events, and traveling from city to city could be lonely and stressful for the collies So they made sure each generation of Lassie had a smaller dog friend to keep them company and provide emotional support during all that travel. This tradition of Lassie having a pet dog continued across multiple generations of the franchise, with different companion dogs forming close bonds with whichever collie was currently playing the famous role. Baby, who was the third dog to play Lassie and perform the role from 1960 to 1966, traveled for many years with a small, silky terrier who became his constant companion and friend. The two dogs would stay together in hotels, ride together in vehicles during travel, and generally provide each other with the companionship that made the demanding life of a working show dog much more bearable. Later generations of Lassie continued this practice with their own pet companions, and by the time Howard was playing the role in the 1990s, the companion dog of choice had become a Jack Russell Terrier named Melvin. Howard rarely went anywhere without Melvin by his side, whether they were making personal appearances, attending events, or traveling to film locations. The Jack Russell Terrier breed is known for being energetic, playful, and loyal, which made Melvin the perfect traveling companion for a working collie who needed a friend to help pass the time between performances. Fact 12. The trainer never watched Lassie again. The bond between Rudd Weatherwax and Pal went far deeper than just a professional relationship between a trainer and his star animal, and when Pal died of natural causes in June of 1958 at the age of 18 years old, the loss hit Weatherwax with a grief so profound that it affected him for the rest of his life. Pal had been with Weatherwax for nearly 2 decades, starting from that day when the unwanted puppy was given to him in exchange for a $10 training fee. And over all those years working together on films and television, the two had formed a connection that went beyond anything that could be described in simple professional terms. After Pal's death, Weatherwax made a decision that revealed just how painful it was for him to be reminded of his beloved friend. He never watched another Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Lassie movie for as long as he lived, unable to bear seeing images of Pal on screen performing the work they had done together. The emotional impact of losing Pal sent Weatherwax into periods of deep depression that lasted for months, where he would slip in and out of dark moods as he struggled to process the loss of the dog who had meant so much to him personally and professionally. Weatherwax buried Pal in a place of honor on his ranch property, and he visited that gravesite regularly to pay his respects and remember the dog who had changed his life and launched an entertainment franchise that would last for decades. His son, Robert, later recalled the depth of his father's grief, saying, "It hit him very hard when Pal died. He buried him in a special place on the ranch and would often visit the grave. Dad would never again watch an MGM Lassie movie. He just couldn't bear to see Pal." Fact 13. Baby died mysteriously young. One of the most puzzling and tragic mysteries in the Lassie franchise involves a collie named Baby, who holds the distinction of playing the famous role longer than any other dog, but also died far younger than he should have, under mysterious circumstances that were never fully explained. Baby took over the role of Lassie in 1960 and continued playing the part for 6 years until 1966, making him the longest-serving Lassie in the entire history of the show, and giving him more screen time as the character than even the original Pal who started it all. Despite this successful and lengthy run in the role, something went tragically wrong with Baby's health, and he suddenly died when he was only 8 years old, which is shockingly young for a collie, and especially unusual given that every other dog who played Lassie lived to be at least 17 years old. The stark contrast between Baby's brief lifespan and the longevity enjoyed by all the other Lassies makes his early death stand out as a genuine anomaly that has never been adequately explained by anyone involved with the Deatherman production. Collies as a breed typically live between 12 and 14 years when they're well cared for, and the Lassie dogs in particular seem to enjoy even longer lifespans than average, likely due to the exceptional veterinary care, nutrition, and attention they received as valuable entertainment properties. The fact that Baby died at roughly half the age of his predecessors and successors raises questions about whether something unusual happened to his health, whether there was an undiagnosed genetic condition that affected only him, or whether the demanding work schedule of being the star of a weekly television series for 6 consecutive years somehow took a toll that the other dogs didn't experience. Fact 14. Timmy never fell down a well. One of the most famous scenes in television history never actually happened, and the persistent myth that it did has become so widespread that the actor involved eventually wrote an entire book just to set the record straight. For decades, people have made jokes and references to the classic Lassie scenario where Timmy falls down a well and Lassie has to bark frantically to get help with the phrase, "What's that, girl? Timmy's in the well?" becoming embedded in popular culture as the quintessential Lassie moment that everyone remembers. The only problem with this cultural memory is that it's completely false, because in the entire run of the Lassie television series, across hundreds of episodes, Timmy Martin never once fell down a well or needed to be rescued from one. John Provost, the actor who played Timmy from 1957 to 1964, became so frustrated with people constantly bringing up this fictional well incident that when he finally wrote his autobiography many years later, he specifically titled it "Timmy's in the Well," just to address the myth head-on and explain to people that this famous scene they all remembered never actually existed. The reality is that while Timmy certainly got into plenty of dangerous situations that required Lassie to save him throughout the show's run, wells were simply never part of the equation. Over the course of those 7 years playing the character, Provost Timmy fell into abandoned mine shafts, tumbled off the edges of cliffs, got swept away in rivers, became trapped in quicksand, and found himself in numerous other life-threatening predicaments. But a well was never one of them. The well myth likely developed because it fit so perfectly with the show's general formula of Timmy getting into trouble and Lassie saving the day. Fact 15. Lassie was the first animal in the Patsy Hall of Fame. Lassie's incredible success and consistent excellence as an animal performer earned the famous collie a place in history as the very first animal ever inducted into a special Hall of Fame created specifically to honor the greatest animal actors in entertainment. The American Humane Association had been giving out the Patsy Award since 1951, with the letters standing for either Picture Animal Top Star of the Year or Performing Animal Television Star of the Year, depending on whether the award was for film or television work, and this honor was considered the animal equivalent of winning an Academy Award. Lassie dominated these awards throughout the 1950s and 60s in a way that no other animal performer had ever managed before, winning the prestigious Patsy Award an incredible 9 separate times between 1958 and 1971. This level of sustained excellence and repeated recognition became almost embarrassing for the organization because Lassie kept winning year after year and preventing other deserving animal actors from having their moment in the spotlight, which created a situation where the awards began to feel predictable rather than exciting. To solve this problem and open up the competition for other animals while still properly honoring Lassie's unmatched achievements, the American Humane Association made a historic decision in 1973 to create an entirely new institution called the Patsy Hall of Fame. This Hall of Fame would serve as a permanent retirement home for animal performers who had proven themselves so consistently excellent over such a long period of time that they no longer needed to compete for annual awards. And Lassie was chosen as the very first inductee into this new Hall of Fame, making the famous collie the inaugural member of what would become an exclusive club, recognizing the all-time greatest animal actors in the history of film and television.